tear, it falls and hits the ground. A tree, it falls without a sound. A bird, it calls and sends you home. A man, he sits in the cold all alone.
Thank you for being here.
Of course. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. Please introduce yourself a little bit for everyone,
Okay.
so we can know a little bit about you, and then we'll head into your story.
Okay, my name's Erin, and I live in Southern California, and I have 3 daughters. I went through infertility pretty much at the start of trying to have babies in 2011, 2010. And yeah, that's that's my introduction, I guess, without going too much into my story. But I currently have my twin daughters are 11 and a half, and then I have a toddler who is 2. And the big age gap is amazing most of the time, and some days it's a little bit more challenging in that I'm kind of having to be 2 different personalities, like every other minute. Some days it feels like, and it can be overwhelming, but thankfully they're all great girls and kind of help me out in a sense. So yeah.
What was the age again? You said 2. Did you say 2?
The twins are 11 and a half. And then the baby or the toddler is 2.
Okay. All right. Okay. Twins 11. Okay. That's a great age though. Like, they want to be helpful. They want to help do things, and
They do. They're just a lot. They're kind of getting into that, like, it's in between, like like an older child versus a teenager. So they kind of are trying to figure out like their boundaries and their limits and test my limits. And so it's definitely a different challenge.
Yeah. And it's more conversational and less playful.
Exactly.
Whereas like full on play. So much energy.
Yeah. And a lot of where we live, they're involved in dance and gymnastics and, obviously school and a few other things. And so I feel like I'm constantly driving from one place to another. I call myself the Uber because I feel like sometimes that's the only time I get to see them is in the car from one thing to another. I mean, they're leave the house at 7:30 for school, and then we come. So most days they're not back home until 6:30 at night. So it's long.
It sounds long. I have a 7-year-old and a 7, a 4, and a 2.
Okay, so you got it.
The 7, he's very conversational, but he's still playful. So that's great because then they're all still playing. So I don't quite have to be 2 different mums.
Yeah.
But it's getting to that point because he's kind of like moving more away from the playing.
Yeah.
Wanting to talk more and wanting to do more, grown up-ish things.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're just like, I know you want to do all these other things, but your siblings are still wanting to play. And can you play a bit longer?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, the 2-year-old. And you forget.
Yeah, they're a challenge.
Yeah. It's good. It's good. It's funny because I was speaking to someone the other day and they're like, motherhood, it's hard. And she was saying it doesn't matter if you're trying, like if you're trying to be a mother or you're like in that season where you've lost, and because you're still a mother, all these things where we're still mothers, and it's all hard. Like all of it's hard. Like trying to have a baby, having the baby, losing a baby, all of it's really just time consuming and mind consuming and difficult, and you want to be the best at your best self while you're doing it. But yeah, so let's get into your story. So where let's go all the way to the beginning. Did you always want to have kids, or was it something that became your goal?
No, I always did. I knew I always did. When my husband and I met, we like even talked about roles and each other's roles, and we both were hoping I could stay home with the kids, like for the most part. You know, we both really wanted that, and, you know, talked numbers of how many and all that. So yeah, it was always, you know, an expectation, I guess.
Yeah. What were the numbers, if you don't mind me asking? Because sometimes it's like interesting because it's like always different from what you decide later.
Yeah, we were always pretty set on 3. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, my husband and I we were like 2, and now we got 3, and now we're like, actually, I could go like 7 or like
Oh
9.
wow.
My kids are like,
Wow.
can we have 10 or 12? And I'm like, I don't know if my body can do that. Like,
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
crazy.
I barely got pregnant again this time. I'm like, I don't, I don't know.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's hard as well when you have those extra expectations. The kids, I'm sure, I don't know if you've had the same questions, like, Mom, can you have another
My
baby?
kids kind of knew about infertility pretty early on, so they weren't really asking much like that. So yeah, we
They
didn't.
understood. They're like, okay,
Yeah,
it's not like
yeah,
easy. Yeah. Whereas my kids are
exactly.
just like, we could just have another one. And it's like,
Yeah, it's the age too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. My 4-year-old, I've had to tell many times that, about the last 2 pregnancies that we lost the babies. And, it's been long, long
Yeah,
to get
sure.
her to understand that. So how were the processes for you? So you knew you always wanted to have kids. So let's go into sort of like when you met your husband and when you guys decided to, start trying and going down that and sort of how
Yeah.
you found out.
So we were married, and then about like 9 months into our marriage, we decided to start trying. So I got off birth control, and um, you know, I wasn't getting a period, but I didn't think anything of it. And we just started to, you know, try. And then because I wasn't getting a period, was kind of like psychologically, well, I was assuming I was pregnant. And I went through boxes of tests, and, you know, they were always negative, and I just thought something was wrong with the test, and obviously they weren't. They were right. So we went to my gynecologist, and then she just said, you're not ovulating, so you need to go see a fertility specialist, which we did right away. We were kind of, you know, very shocked because I was only 26 and he was, you know, barely turning, he was 30, 30, yeah. And, you know, we were both healthy and everything else. And so, um, anyway, they, I had a lot of follicles. I was never diagnosed with PCOS, but I had a lot. They weren't maturing. And so that's why I wasn't ovulating. So they decided that I should do an IUI for my first attempt, and it actually worked right away. I mean, we did like menopur shots, and then it worked, but I conceived triplets instead of twins, or instead of a singleton. And back then, I think that they weren't, I don't know how it is there, but over here, pretty, they're pretty like conscious about not letting you drop more than one egg, for an IUI, with, you know, because of the risk of multiples. And I guess back then they didn't really care about it as much. I mean, this was now like 12 years ago. So I ended up with triplets, and I'm really small. And so the doctors had said, hey, we really suggest for you to have a medical reduction, which is essentially an abortion of one of the 3, so that there's a much greater likelihood that you will be healthy, and that, you know, 2 of the babies will be healthy. So it was kind of a huge decision to have to make at that age, especially after already having to do treatments, you know, not knowing anybody that has gone through that. My friends weren't even trying to have babies yet. Um, and we made the decision, and we had a reduction around 9 weeks, which is like, was kind of like it was like 9 or 10 weeks where that was like the very last week that you could do it, only because it would, the chances of it affecting the other 2 were like slim to none at that stage. So we did it, and it was really difficult, but I mean, we know we made the right decision, but it's still hard to think about just because it was obviously nothing we would have ever thought we'd have to do as a young couple. But my twins were born at 37 and a half weeks vaginally, and they were really small, which is why we know we made the right decision. They were healthy. We got to take one home right away, and the other one had to stay for about 11 days to grow. But yeah, that was our first really big traumatic year.
Yeah. And if you had that third one in there, you know, who knows, you know, that third one could have been in the hospital longer than those days, or you could have had all of them in hospital. You might not have been able to take any of them home. Yeah, I have heard.
Or my health too, you know, because they were saying like, well, because you're so small, like, you know, you have a risk too. And I think that was one of the biggest things. My husband's like, we're not going to risk your life to have, you know, so it was hard. I mean, I think in hindsight, looking back, I know that it would be way different if that were to have happened today in terms of the way that the IUI was handled.
Yeah, definitely.
Because there was obviously at least 3 mature eggs that were about to drop, right? So, but we didn't know anything. We hadn't done any research. We, you know, I'm not like saying it's our fault by any means, but I do really, really preach for people to advocate for themselves and like understand as much as they can prior to going into anything, because I think that it would have changed a lot for us. Had we had felt like that was okay to do, you know, to like ask questions. And also had we felt like there was other people going through it, because at the time, you know, social media was not even really anything. I think there was Facebook. People didn't talk about it, you know, and there weren't like support groups like there are today, even on social media, where you can just see people, you know, search a hashtag and you feel like you are surrounded by people that have your same issue. Well, that didn't exist.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking about like that decision and how hard that would have been, because it's like, yeah, which baby do you not want? And you're like, well, I want all of them. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
So
I mean,
hard.
we obviously didn't know I mean, because it's an IUI, you don't know anything, right? And they just did the one that was the easiest to get to. It's how they chose.
I mean that to me sounds better in terms like for you, because then you didn't choose.
Yeah, I didn't have to make that decision, obviously.
Making that decision would have torturous, I think.
Absolutely.
I have spoken to women who, you know, were like, no, I'm keeping this pregnancy, and yeah, there were complications, and you know, things were a bit tough after they had the babies, and you know, NICU and all that. Obviously trauma on trauma on trauma. But they do have, you know, healthy kids now. But yeah, it's a lot to think about and a lot to do, and you know, and there are long-term health effects that can happen as well when babies are born too early, and definitely triplets. And I mean, my body, oh my gosh, I can only manage one at a time, and I get massive, like so big, and my body just starts like,
my stomach muscles tore, and so I actually had to have surgery because I also had a hernia about 6 months postpartum. They suggested that I just take care of it because my back was hurting really bad, since I didn't have like an abdomen to hold back any organs. So that was one thing too, that was like, I know it would have been even worse if I had another one in there. So, you know, I did that surgery, which was actually the worst thing ever. But I mean, you know, lucky enough, I guess, that I got a chance to do it. But
yeah, I totally, I can feel you, and that would have been horrible. I've never been faced with that, and I'm so grateful that I haven't been, because that would have been very full on. I've got the diastasis too, but I don't have my insides coming out just yet. But I'm a bit concerned this time, because I'm feeling a lot of pressures and all that. So yeah, hopefully I'll be all right. Yeah, but it's definitely a consideration. I think sometimes we can get lost in the fight to want to have kids, that we don't necessarily consider our own health and our own body.
Absolutely.
But you were faced with that, and you had to sort of make that decision. And I am glad that the doctors actually do like make that a thing as well, like your health and your ability.
Yeah, I do too. And I mean, I'm thankful too. My husband probably had a much more level head, even though he didn't want to do it, but he was like, we have to, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So obviously, I mean, that's a loss. You know, it's a medically necessary, what they usually call it, I think.
Yeah, like yeah, they just call it a medical reduction, or you know, medically.
Yeah, so how did you cope with that? Because obviously you were still pregnant with the other two.
Yeah.
You started feeling them, and like how
Yeah.
was that emotionally?
My husband actually said he never wanted to talk about it again. So on our drive home that day, I kind of felt like I couldn't, you know, just to respect his wishes. And truthfully, I didn't know who to talk about it to, because at the time we didn't have a therapist or anything. And my friends didn't even know we were doing fertility treatments, because we just thought like nobody would understand. So we didn't talk about it for a long time, and it really affected us. I know it was part of the reason why our marriage started to, you know, really dysfunction. We had a lot of problems in our marriage for years after that. I mean, you can't blame everything on that, but that's one of them. And it's just, I think the whole idea of internalizing pain was, you know, one of the big reasons why we had so many issues in our marriage, just pain in general, you know, pain from your past, pain from growing up, and now this. And so there's just so many layers that kept adding and adding. And I think this was one of the tipping points for us, you know, along with just infertility in general. So we never really coped with it. I mean, we talked about it a little bit here and there once we started seeing a therapist a couple of years later. But I don't think it was until I started my blog that I actually put it down on paper and kind of relived the whole moment again, because I told him, I was like, I have to be able to talk about this. I have to be able, this is part of like our story. And what if somebody's going through this and they obviously feel ashamed, or the same way that we were feeling? You know, there's nothing, everyone has a right to the decision they make. And this wasn't like I don't know. I mean, even if it was something that was an accident, everybody has a right to decide what is right for their family, for their bodies. So I just felt it was important to talk about. And he finally said, okay. So I put it down on paper, and, you know, that's kind of the first time we started talking about it again, which was like in 2019. So a lot of years later. And we just recently told the twins about it, maybe like a year ago, that they were triplets, because it's hard for me to keep it in whenever they, you know, talk about a lot of things, like bring it up, you know? So I asked my husband, when do you think I can say something? And they get it now, and they're probably a little bit more mature for their age and all this than a lot of their friends are, but I knew they could handle it.
Yeah. And I mean that in itself is a hard thing. Like, when do I tell the kids? Because obviously we want to protect them all the time, and you don't want to hurt them. But then
Exactly.
it is something that they still need to sort of know about. And it's just, finding that time. And it's really great that you were able to tell them, and tell them together, like with you both, you and your husband being on the same page.
Yeah.
Gosh, that made me tear up so much when you said that, because my husband, he can be he can detach a lot with his emotions. Like he's like, I don't even feel it, you know, because he's just got these safety mechanisms. But when a man says things like, we're not talking about this again, like, it just breaks my heart, because I know that is them going, this hurts, and I can't.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think you know, any woman who's going through this right now, and maybe their partner said something like that, similar, you know, maybe sitting him down and just saying, I need
Yeah.
to. And
Yeah.
that's okay for you to need that, because
Yeah.
although you're trying to respect him, he needs to respect you too, because
Yeah.
you're
I
both
think
going.
it's just also like finding, if he doesn't want to talk about it, then, that's, you can't force him, but maybe finding a different space to talk about it. You don't have to like put it all out there like I did, but, you know, being able to find somebody else that you can talk to about it. And like I said before, it's just, we didn't know anybody that was struggling through any of that. And honestly, even to this day, none of our friends ever had to. And so there was, always like a lack of space for that to happen.
And it almost becomes like an elephant in the room if it's something where it's like a no-go, you can't talk about that.
Yeah.
Because my husband and I, we've always kind of had this thing where we're like, we're going to talk about everything, but every now and then there is that moment of no go, and then we have to be like, okay, no, we actually have to talk about it, because if we don't, this is going to be a thing, it's going to blow up and be this big mountain instead of this little hill that it is right now. But it is hard because you know them, your husband, their buttons, what is getting to them, and then they know you too, and it's just it's tricky. Relationships are tricky. So moving from then, there's a quite a big gap in between your twins and your 2-year-old. So what happened between then and that one?
So our marriage was just not doing well at all. So we, saw therapists and did all the things, but ultimately one day it just kind of came down to me asking for a divorce. And it kind of like lit a fire under his butt or something. Because he just kind of realized that like he needed to get help. He just was like kind of, he was verbally abusive, and just I think had a lot of pent up anger from just his past, like nothing to do with me. And I think all the little things that we were going through, not little, they were big. All the big things we were going through were adding a lot of pressure and anxiety and all that to what he was already trying to fight. So he agreed to get help. He ended up seeing a therapist on his own. He still does. And honestly, we gave ourselves about 6 months to see any type of change. And he really surprised me and has been working on himself ever since. And it's, probably like the greatest we've ever been. So it's interesting how all that really did kind of force us to, I always say like hitting rock bottom for us was probably the best thing ever for our marriage. Cause I think at some point it would have been that bad regardless of what the issue was. And in this case, I think because it was something so personal and so unifying, that it almost like made him want to work on it, if that makes sense. Like if it would have been, I don't know, like a bankruptcy or a lost job, who knows? But I personally believe that like, while I don't wish this diagnosis upon anyone, I think for us, it actually really saved us in the end. So after that, we decided to have another kid. I mean, look, having twins was really, really hard, even without a tough marriage. So for a few years, I was like, nope, I'm done. But once they started school, they were going to kindergarten, and I was like, okay, like now they're very self-sufficient. They, are doing things, they're in classes. Not only are they in school, but they're like doing dance. And so I said, I think we can definitely handle another one, and like, let's have another one now that we're in this place of our lives. We knew we were still infertile. I still hadn't had a period. So I basically hadn't had a natural period since I was 17 when I went on the birth control pill. And that's why we just kind of assumed we needed to get help, because it's not like we weren't not trying. We just were never like really gung-ho about it. Like I wasn't timing anything. But for a little under 6 years of never using protection and nothing ever happening. So we went to the IVF clinic. And this time we just said we want to go straight into IVF because we want to avoid multiples. And they're like, great, you're going to be a perfect candidate. sign here, give us your money. And we again went into it kind of blindly. Like we didn't realize that there's a chance that it won't work right away. There's a chance that, you might need 2 or 3. We just didn't know. Again, we still weren't talking about it. We still weren't really letting too many people know that we were doing that. We didn't do too much research. I mean, a little bit more than before, but definitely not enough. And was just kind of going and trusting our doctor. So we went in, we did our first egg retrieval in 2017 and ended up with one normal, we do the PGS testing here. And so we got one normal embryo from there, which also was a shock because I just thought we would get a lot since I had so many follicles. So we transferred that one. We were kind of working on like, let's just, because we didn't want more than one. And so we weren't trying to bank embryos. And I know a lot of people that are family planning, will do multiple retrievals in a row. But we were just like, let's just transfer this one, So we did, and we thought it would work, and it didn't, which was really devastating. Kind of just jumped back into it again without even seeing our doctor really, and did the whole process again ended up with one normal, one abnormal. So they actually transferred both because they're like, there's a better chance. I don't know. It was an interesting call. So I don't think it was abnormal. It was just graded very, very poor.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But the doctor was like, yeah, let's just transfer both. It's interesting how different doctors have different opinions, but that time our actual doctor couldn't be a retrieval. So we got a transfer. So we ended up with another doctor last minute, and she was like, let's transfer both. So, what do? We just keep trusting these doctors. And that failed. Both of those failed. Then we did that same. So now we're in 2018, and we decided to just do another IUI because we thought, okay, whatever, at this point, if it's multiples, we'll deal with it. I think the odds are small, but like, let's just try. So we did an IUI. It didn't work. My husband was really exhausted and just thought we needed a break financially and mentally, because obviously none of that was covered here. And so we took a break that summer of 2018 and then came back and did another retrieval. I actually switched clinics because I just wasn't really, I felt like I was just another number to that clinic. Instead of like, what's the problem with you? Let's do testing. There was no testing done on me, nothing. So I switched clinics, got like hysteroscopy done, and a few other like just, smaller tests, but at least there was something. And we did another retrieval, and I this time decided not to test the embryos just because I was like, well, there's different studies on them, let's just try. So I ended up transferring one, and we got pregnant in December 2018. And we thought that was it. We were so excited. And then we went in for like our final appointment at the clinic. So it was around 8.5 weeks. And then they discovered there wasn't a heartbeat anymore. And we had already told the twins, and, so it was really, really hard. Cause we just thought, well, why would there be a miscarriage if you're doing IVF? I mean, I know our embryo wasn't tested, but we just thought, well, if we've already seen a heartbeat, we've already seen it grow. How does this happen? Again, it's not having enough information, not knowing anybody that had gone through it, not really realizing that there's so many women that go through that.
Yeah.
So that miscarriage lasted about 3 months because they had me take the misoprostol pill to kind of induce the pregnancy.
Right.
The miscarriage. And the first go around, it didn't work well enough. And so the second I had to take it again, and then I bled like overnight. It was really intense. And my levels just weren't dropping. So like I was still pregnant. And it was just so exhausting mentally because you just want to move on. And so every week I'd go into the clinic and my numbers were still high, and they were still high. And then finally in March, they're like, let's just go in there and see what's going on. And I still had tissue left. So then they had to do a DNC anyway. So that's why I always like, if people ask me for advice of how they should carry on with their, miscarriage or procedure, I always just say, go straight for the DNC. That was just my experience. But, it just was so drawn out that I wish I would have gone that route from the beginning.
Yeah. And the wait like the length of time is like a whole nother layer of trauma, because just
you have no control.
And you have to wait. And it's like that whole time, that there's no baby. And it's just,
exactly. And so you're just bleeding for like 3 months.
Yeah. So, and you still have the hormones.
Yeah. So long. So we did that. And then I said, I'm not going to transfer any more embryos from that, collection unless we test them. So I realized that defrosting them and testing them and then refreezing them was going to make the quality lessen. But it was just a risk I had to take, because I was like, there's no way I'm going through that again because of us not testing him. So, and we don't know none of my tissue was testable. We have no idea what the issue was, but I'm going to assume it was the embryo. And so we retested and we only ended up with one normal one, but now the quality was really low. Transferred it anyways. That failed. And I was kind of like done, even though I wasn't, it was one of those like, okay. And my husband's like, let's just do one more retrieval. Like, I had been doing acupuncture for a year. I was, really, really trying to do all the things. I said, okay. So we did one more egg retrieval. This one was my best one. I was actually 35. So it was like, I was the oldest versus so it's interesting to me sometimes when people say age, because you just never know. But I ended up with 3 normal embryos. So that was the most I'd ever had. So after testing and everything, which was great for us. Long story short, transferred the first one, failed, transferred the second one, failed. I did like a pelvic MRI. I did all the different tests. They put me on letrozole for 3 months. I don't think that did much. And then we had 1 embryo left, and I was really, really depressed, just because you also forget that going on and off these really intense hormones really affect you. And so this was now my 6th transfer in a row, basically, that, or, within the 3 years that I had been on these crazy heavy drugs and really never let up too much. So as soon as you're done with, when your transfer fails, you have to immediately cut out all these medications, which will then brings you down right away. And I don't know why, but that last time just hit me the hardest, because I think it was just an accumulation of so much. And then also obviously the fact that he had been going through it for so long and all these things. So, February 2020, a few weeks before that, we ended up switching doctors within the clinic. I was talking to a different doctor because we were just like, let's just get, we actually were trying to do our follow-up appointment and my doctor wasn't there. So the nurse was like, well, do you want to just talk to this guy? And I had met him a couple of times, really liked his personality. And I said, yeah, let's just meet with him, because for me, meeting and it just helps me move forward. So I said, let's just meet with him. And if we don't get what we need out of it, we'll still meet with our doctor when he returns, 2 weeks later, but I need to talk to someone. So we had 1 embryo left that was normal. So we met with him and just fell in love. We realized he was kind of very aligned with who we are as people, our personality, all that kind of stuff. And he took us on. And so we felt awkward. We didn't know what to do, but I always tell people the clinic just wants you to succeed, and, maybe it'll be awkward or whatever, but who cares? If it's making you more comfortable, if you think that it's going to give you a better outcome or whatever the reason, you have a right to request to change anything. So we did. And I was very hesitant about doing another transfer because of how depressed I was prior to that. And my husband's like, look, we have 1 more. it's not the best graded, but like, let's just do it. We're not even going to make a plan for after, which we normally did. Cause I'm like, and he's like, let's just try. Like, you're probably going to be wondering about it if you don't, which he's right. And I wasn't really done. I just didn't want to do that again. So we did. And in February 2020, we transferred her, and it worked. So yeah, I mean, like, it was obviously scary. The whole world shut down like 2 weeks later. And we just felt lucky enough that we got to transfer her and got, positive pregnancy tests. But then every single appointment after that, I had to go alone, which after you've lost is super duper duper scary. Every appointment I assumed that they were going to tell me that something was wrong. And so it was really hard to go in by myself. He was able to be there at birth, but that was it. Other than that, he was never allowed to go into any appointment, which is wild to me considering, the things we know now. But that's another recording.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. Like, when I was actually pregnant with my last living child, and when he was born, like, it was 2020 in the middle of the year. So it was really, really surreal. Like, whenever I wanted to go in for a checkup, or I was worried, or I felt reduced movement or something, like, yeah, the hospital was empty. I had to go in alone. It was just really horrible. Yeah, and the whole experience is just not nice.
Yeah.
I didn't have the added layer or trauma of having lost already. But yeah, it wasn't a nice experience being someone who hadn't had loss. So with the loss on top of that, it would have been like even more so. Cause yeah, it was like being in a movie. There was no one in there. It was weird.
It was weird. It was weird. And we found a little clinic that like was not part of the hospital that kind of, they do like ultrasounds. It's kind of just like a boutique, and you pay to have an ultrasound, and it's just an ultrasound tech. I mean, they don't really tell you any, medical information, I guess, other than if the heart wasn't beating, knock on wood. But they definitely, we found that. And so my husband would come with me to that, like almost every time before, once you're able to see her through like the topical one, before every appointment, just so that I could go in to my OB knowing, like, by myself, knowing like, okay, we just saw her like a few days ago, she's fine. So that was helpful, even though I know it could happen like 10 seconds after you're done seeing her, right? But like, just the idea that we did just see her kind of helped,
Well, you can remind yourself of, I've just seen her.
Exactly.
And kind of make it a mantra. I mean, I mean, you have this, I think we've all had a similar experience, like after loss, you're lying on that table, they're looking and you're seeing the baby, but then you're kind of like numb because you're just like, well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to hold that baby. So it doesn't really mean anything. But it does make you feel a little bit better because you're like, well, I've seen the baby, I'm pregnant right now. Like I can feel it moving. So then, it's still alive for now. Like that's what I know right now. The day by day kind of approach. But I can understand why you got so depressed in that moment of, I mean, I know it wasn't a moment, it was like a while, but you had one egg left, and that would have played on your mind even more so. And then with the drop of the drugs and like, how did you go with the treatments? Because I know some women really react badly from, all the hormone injections.
They always like lifted me up. I mean, I never felt depressed on them. It was always when you had to stop, that was like, I mean, and granted, you're also stopping because, you've miscarried or the transfer failed. So there's already that depression on its own. But I never really, they're not fun. I gained like 15 pounds because of them. My skin totally got crazy, and I developed a bunch of like broken capillaries on my face. You know, a lot of like my face ended up getting like really spotty, but nothing that's like not treatable later. And I knew like the weight would come off eventually. That honestly like never bothered me. It was kind of a unfair quality seeing that you would gain the weight and then not end up even being pregnant. um, and so that was, I mean, it wasn't fun, but it was like I knew at some point I would be totally done and that would go away if I wanted it to. Um, but the medication itself, you know, I mean, it's not pleasant, but it didn't ever like fully, I guess those are enough side effects, but mentally being on them, it almost was like made me feel like I was actively trying to have a baby, if that makes sense. So like when I wasn't doing the injections, I kind of felt like stagnant to where I wasn't like doing something to try and have a baby. So, you know, most people will have sex or like time their intercourse and you know, get on the right vitamins or get ovulation tests. Like for me, not being on the medicine, doing injections just meant that we weren't trying.
Well, I mean, for you, I mean, there was nothing to time.
Which is true. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, it is a fact actually, but like mentally, that's kind of what it would do. And so whenever I had to put like the sharps container away, like it was just a reminder that, you know, we're not going to be doing anything for the next few weeks, which is hard because, you know, you're so dependent on that and the doctors and what time and like, you know, all of that instead of your own time. So
yeah, well, that's a really interesting perspective that you've gone through, because obviously you weren't having the periods and so you were kind of reliant on them.
yeah.
Whereas with other women I've spoken to, they were like, oh, it was so good to have a break from everything and just like not be doing anything and just kind of breathing, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we knew we were taking a break, like when we took that break in the summer where it was like clear, we're gonna take a break. It was hard at the beginning, but then it was like knowing we were gonna start again, you know, whenever that date was, that allowed me to enjoy that break. But it's when you
You
have
didn't have a choice.
when you didn't have a choice, exactly. So when you're just wanting to start again, it's like that period of time in between the two. It's so hard because, you know, you did all that, you're not pregnant, you gain weight, you still don't know if you should have a glass of wine, you don't know if you should go on a run, you don't know, like, you know, you're in limbo and but should you be? And like, you know what I mean? It's all this stuff. And it's like, well, what's the soonest we can start? And yeah, it's so much. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's like life gets put on hold and you're just kind of,
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
do I have a direction or am I stuck here?
Exactly.
So, okay, so gosh, you had a lot of transfers. I mean, how like I've heard people say, oh, well, it just didn't take. So is it a case of like the transfer just doesn't stick and then it just can't like falls away or
Yeah, so I mean, there could be different cases. You could end up, it could have attached at some point and then just, you know, miscarried really early on because you don't test obviously until 2 weeks, but technically it implants within the first like 4 or 5 days.
okay.
Um, or maybe even up to the day 6. But so you just don't ever fully know because unfortunately all the medication you take gives you all the same symptoms. And so like, you know, your breasts start to feel huge and I always had my breasts like super painful every single time. You have crazy twinges, you have a lot of cramping, and that's just from the transfer. But also the progesterone does that. And so it mimics a pregnancy. And so your mind plays so many tricks. You're like, oh, what was that? I felt this and I feel this. And is it, I totally think it worked this time because I feel this. And it never did.
Yeah.
And so that was really hard just because like it's all just you just have no idea. And so yeah, so when the transfer fails, it technically, I guess in technical terms, means it did an implant. I don't, like I said, I don't know if it ever did. It's sometimes, you know, and maybe then like miscarried early. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody would ever really know.
Probably.
But yeah, I mean, they like to see your numbers at like a certain number. And so if it's super duper low, they're like, okay, well, it could be an ectopic pregnancy or, you know, all that kind of stuff. My numbers, I never really asked what my numbers were when they told me that I wasn't pregnant. I just, you know, didn't really need to know.
Yeah. There's, you know, once you know that, you know, it's not gone the way you want it to.
Yeah.
Well, great. Can we move on now?
Yeah.
Try something else. But I think, yeah, we still have to, unfortunately, we still have to deal with it. Like our bodies have to go through that postpartum, you know, section. What would you say it has been sort of, I mean, you said that the last loss was the hardest on you, but just because, yeah, you um you felt like that was going to be like fruitful. So how was that experience, like in terms of like how did you move through it? You know, what's your going to talk?
I mean, I think every single time, the only thing that really helped me was we'd try to take like a little vacation. But even that was not fully letting my brain, like, you know, it wasn't like helping. I think the only thing that ever really helped was having a plan for what we're doing next, because I just knew that I had to have this other baby. And, you know, who knows if it would have taken another year, if that would have been the same process in my head. But up until then, it was always like, well, what's next? Well, when can we start? When am I going to meet the doctor? Like having that on the calendar helped me kind of like, you know, sadly have something to look forward to, which I hate saying because obviously I had my twins and like I could still really enjoy them, but like this is just what happens when you go through it for so long. Like you really just can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah, I said this to someone because obviously I have 3 kids, and I've been through 2 losses. And
Mm-hmm.
you do get that, oh, well, aren't you just glad to have the kids that you have? And it's like you can be glad and
Yeah,
really grateful and you know, be in love with your kids so much. But
exactly.
still crave and just long for another child because
Yeah.
they're like their own little individual being, you know, it's not
Yeah.
like you can, you know, love one and, you know, not, yeah, you want more sometimes.
Well, like what I always say is like when somebody that's fertile or hasn't gone through loss and they say, "Oh, we're going to try for another one." Most people are like rejoicing and congratulating them early on even before they're pregnant. And then when I was telling people we were still wanting to try, you know, after a couple of losses, they're like, that wasn't the case. It was like, why are you still trying? Why don't you just stop? Why don't you enjoy the kids that you have? Why are you spending all this? So it's just funny to me how different the assumption is for somebody who has to go through all this when they already have a couple kids versus somebody who really wants 3 or 4 kids, you know, and announces that they're going to go for their third or fourth. There's never a negative connotation to it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've definitely had it, and you know, since I've had losses, you know, oh, you're trying for another one, you know,
Yeah.
you didn't even know you wanted more kids, and it's just like, well, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, it may seem crazy to you because you know this would be my fourth, and you know, if we have more after this, then yeah, maybe it is a crazy amount of children to have, but I can't help how I
Your life.
feel like. I just, yeah, you just want kids, and it becomes this like drive, like I must have more children. Um, but yeah, so how was it after you had your rainbow?
Yeah, so I mean, it was hard because we were, you know, in the middle of a pandemic. But aside from that, you know, I thought it was going to be a lot harder in terms of their relationship. I was really worried about the big age gap, but it's honestly been the biggest blessing I could have ever asked for. Like their relationship is something I never could have imagined. And it was hard at the beginning, more so just because having another person there to take up a lot of my time. I mean, it had just been the 4 of us for 9.5 years. So to then bring in this other being that is actually taking up 90% of my time at the first 6 months of her life was hard. Also, again, it was in a pandemic, so there wasn't much else to do but rely on me for entertainment or school or, all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of, it was an interesting, I think, dynamic for them. And for me, because I felt really guilty and I wanted to be with them and I wanted to sit down and have dinner with them. And it just couldn't happen the first 5.5 months. It just was not happening. And finally we ended up sleep training her and then kind of got on a really good schedule to where I knew I was going to get to eat dinner with my family and knew I was going to get to sleep. And, we have help and she's amazing. She has her schedule and really rely on her and Ariela loves her. And so it took a while to figure out what exactly our needs were going to be because you just don't really know until they're here. But once we did it, none of it is easy, but it's, asking for help. And, like I said, for us, having a schedule is really, really helpful just to kind of know when you're going to have the time for who and for what and for yourself,
Yeah.
So,
how was it, like emotionally and physically? Because I know like after losses, we can kind of struggle a little bit when we have that baby that we've been trying to have for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's still something I think about. I mean, I still have I think we went through so much trauma. Then I was pregnant and then I had the baby and pandemic and then you're in life and you don't end up having time to fully deal with everything that you went through. And so I think now is when I've been doing that and it definitely there's a lot of stuff that's still there and thankfully I see a therapist and my husband and I still see a therapist together and opening up on Instagram and blogging and talking to a lot of other women that have gone through it has been really really helpful.
Yeah, I've definitely found the same thing. My two losses, one was in May and one was in September, so it was like, and then I got pregnant again, so it's very, you don't really have the time to deal with them when you're in it, when you're like, and you're trying to have the baby and you're like going through all the hormones and everything, like you just don't, you're right, you just don't get that time, and then you have to deal with it kind of after, but it still comes at some point. But yeah, is there anything, just on a sort of final note, is there anything that you would like say to anyone who's maybe in the throes of it right now, who's going through it?
I think what I always say is just stay hopeful, because to me, like, having hope was really the only thing that kept pushing me through, and really trust your gut, because even if the world is telling you to stop or don't do anymore or this or that, like, it doesn't matter. It's whatever feels right to you. And if stop being treatments, I don't like to say giving up, because there's no way this is any way, shape, or form of you giving up. Like, I don't like that term. But if you're ready to stop, then that's completely okay too. It's just kind of, everybody has their own journey, and I think it's really hard to not compare, and it's really hard to not even compare to what you thought your life was going to look like, because I think that's really hard on its own. And so to bring in any outside noise, I like to call it just adds so much pressure and guilt that that's like the one thing I really try to do is just avoid anybody else's opinions. And again, find support. And it's especially from people that are going through it. Like, I have two really good friends who've always been so supportive, but even them, like, they have never had to go through this. And so there's still a level of understanding that they don't have, that everybody who I have as friends through social, honestly, that how I met, truly understand. And it's just been so helpful.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You can have friends who are close but don't get it.
Yeah.
But then we have this great opportunity with social media and Zoom, and we can meet up, and be like, this sucks, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So right now you guys, you're content. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're good. Our family is complete, and we're, my husband had a vasectomy just to kind of not even think about any of that anymore. And it was hard, obviously, because it's kind of like, wow, it's really ending. But we've literally lived our entire marriage trying to build a family, and we're finally like, let's enjoy our family. So that's kind of our little saying.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And I mean, yeah, I mean, you could technically, I mean, I know you don't have periods, but I suppose it could still happen, maybe. Like,
Yeah,
if
I've been
you
working
had
with
one.
a naturopath, and so I've actually been doing a lot of homeopathic work, and I actually have gotten a period. So
Wow.
yeah, so it's really exciting. I am no hormones, but just doing all things naturopathically, and it's been amazing. So I'm just continuing that journey, and just trying to be healthier version internally.
That's wonderful to hear though, because I mean, look, periods suck, but not
They're necessary.
having them also sucks.
Yeah,
It's our body kind of needs to clean out and do whatever it needs to do. And
exactly. I agree.
I've got a new appreciation for periods, because
Yeah.
originally I was like, oh, I hate periods, I don't never want to have one. But after talking to so many women who don't have them, I'm like, oh, I'm grateful. I have to be
Yeah,
grateful. Okay,
exactly. Yeah,
I'd
for
rather have a
sure.
period than not.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Just on a final note, um, what has it been like having periods now that you're having some?
I think it's just been, to be honest, I do wish Western medicine and naturopathy could work more hand in hand, because I do wonder what would have happened had I, really figured out my hormones years ago, and tried to work on my body naturally a little bit more. I love science because it gave me my kids, but I wonder how much this could have actually helped me in the past. I can't really think about it that way, obviously, but moving forward, like, I just think it's so important to um, just really know what's going on, and a lot of times, unfortunately, Western medicine doesn't dig in as much as they could. Um, and that's kind of what I'm learning. So having a period has been great. I'm happy. I feel very healthy, and um, you know, that's all. I'm just thankful.
Wonderful. Well, I'll link some of the interviews below, where I'm actually talking to people about alternative treatments and
Okay, great. Yeah,
acupuncture, and even like different what you call it, nutritional things that you can do. Because yeah, I mean, it's true, like Western medicine really doesn't think about, working with your body a lot of the time. They're
right.
like, no, it's this set way of kind of doing it. So I
Exactly.
think, yeah, but yeah, definitely don't think of it in like, oh yeah, I should, hindsight type things.
I
We
know.
make the decisions we make at the time with the
Exactly.
best knowledge we have. We
You're
do
right.
we do our best. Like none of us go
Yeah,
into this like on purpose to fail or to do something terrible.
exactly. I know. You're right. You're right.
But I think you're doing a wonderful job, and thank you for sharing and
So thank
for
you for having me.
Please note that all speakers, including experts and professionals, express information, views, and opinions that should not be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any medical conditions. If you have a medical issue, please consult a qualified professional. Speakers voice their own views, opinions, and conclusions, and they may not reflect the views, opinions, and conclusions of other speakers. Ella Rose, The Joy of Sunflowers, and its sponsors may not endorse all or any of the views, opinions, or conclusions expressed.